Thank you very much and welcome to our session. We'll start with a little round of introductions. So my name is Vicky. I'm one of the co-founders of GIG, the Global Innovation Gathering, which is a network of social and digital innovators from all around the world.
Hi, my name is Lea. I'm a senior expert at GIZ, the German Development Agency, and I'm one of the initiators of our open voice data collection project.
And I'm Kelly Davis. I'm the manager of the machine learning team at Mozilla.
Yeah, and Audace Niyonkuru. I'm the managing director of Digital Maganda, which is building common digital infrastructure for Rwanda.
Thank you. So just a quick heads up for the audience. Lea and I will share the moderation of this panel, so we will switch at some point, you'll notice. And I'll start facilitating. So as you've all probably gathered from the program, our panel takes Digital Umuganda, Audace's project, as a starting point to discuss digital commons and data as a commons. So basically, how to use data not just as a tool, but as an infrastructure for local value creation, inclusive technology, and most of all, for reclaiming or claiming digital sovereignty. And we're at this nexus that is very apparent at the moment while we're creating the future of it, of AI, voice, and common, like data as a commons. So how do we continue on this track towards a future where human-machine interaction will probably be guided by voice and where artificial intelligence plays a major role in the development towards that? So right now we're at the early stages of this development, and it's interesting to see what's happening there. So as a first introduction to where we're coming from, I would like to ask Lea a few questions about the project. So why are you working on voice interaction, and why open voice data collection?
Yeah, let me start by saying that we are currently facing a linguistic divide. More than 50% of the content online is currently in English, which by far surpasses the number of native English speakers worldwide. And the same is actually true for German as well. And this linguistic divide does not only apply to the internet, but also to technology as such, for example, to voice interaction technology. Which basically means that the language you speak determines massively your online experience and your experience of digital technologies. However, we believe that voice interaction is the future of human-machine interaction. However, this is a future just available to a few of us, to those people who are actually speaking dominant languages covered with these kind of technologies, like English, German, French, Italian. And a few others, but not for people who are actually speaking underrepresented languages. And that's a shame, because there's quite a huge potential in voice interaction, we believe. When I speak about potential, I mean, for example, the ability to give people access to services and information. So just imagine a young woman in rural Nigeria who has access to maternal health information just by speaking in her device. Or the potential of creating local value and stimulate innovation. So if you have open voice data, the topic that we are talking about today, available in, well, let's say Kinyarwanda, for example, then also local developers can develop applications, such as the maternal health app I was just talking about. And then, of course, when you're speaking about voice recognition in underrepresented languages, you have also the point of preserving culture. So language does not only define the past, but also the future of all of us. So voice interaction technology is currently not available in many of these languages, and that's basically due to 2 points. First of all, there's no economic reason for big tech to develop these applications. And second of all, there's not enough data. So if someone would like to develop this maternal health application, you wouldn't find any data for Kenya, Rwanda, any voice data to train artificial intelligences with. So we actually decided to start doing this because we believe in this potential and we would like to realize it for international development.
I'd like to ask Kelly to tell us a little bit more about Mozilla's Common Voice project, which is closely connected to the Digital Umuganda project, and we actually have slides for that.
Yes, I will quickly grab this. So, okay. So Common Voice is basically a web app that allows anyone to create speech data sets in any language. And these speech data sets can then subsequently be used to actually train a speech recognition engine, again, in any language, or train any other algorithm that seems interesting. So basically, so why Common Voice? As we've mentioned, so speech recognition is really becoming more and more prevalent as a way to interact with computers. However, sort of being Mozilla and working in this area, we really want to ensure as many languages and as many cultures are really supported by speech recognition. So to sort of do this, I'll take a slightly more deep look in terms of what's required for speech recognition. So basically, speech recognition requires more or less three different ingredients. So one of these is speech algorithms. So basically, algorithm or code that is able to take speech and translate the speech into text. So another ingredient which is required is compute. So the basic computational infrastructure to actually train these algorithms to recognize speech. And a third thing which is required is speech data. So basically, thousands of hours of audio with people speaking along with the transcripts of these audios. I'd say Common Voice is really tackling this speech data problem really right now. There's another project called Deep Speech, which Mozilla is working on too, which tackles the other two problems. And it's unfortunately but true that the actually hardest problem here is the speech data problem. For open data, really for all languages, English is included, there's not really enough speech data to create an open speech recognition model. And it even gets worse. I think English is really sort of the best of the worst in a lot of ways. Once you go off English, so the amount of data is really sort of minuscule. Basically, there's thousands of languages which exist, which basically there's not enough speech data to create a speech recognition engine for. So, and Common Voice basically aims to solve this problem. So Common Voice is actually relatively simple in a way. It works as follows. Basically allows contributors to donate speech to a common data set in various different languages. I just have English really right here. Is sort of, the presentation is in English. So it works as this one's presented, or contributors presented with basically a sentence to read. And an important point I should mention is this sentence is CC0. And this makes things a little bit more difficult in getting sentences for people to read, as one has to have CC0 sentences. And the reason it's hard to get is because, say, news articles and things like this aren't CC0. So we have to actually look for CC0 sentences or have contributors give us CC0 sentences. And it's hard sort of on creating the sentences, but it makes the data set much more useful because people are able to use the data set for essentially any purpose when it's actually done. So back to how this actually works. Users presented with a CC0 sentence, and then they're asked to read the sentence aloud after pushing the record button. And they record this sentence, and then they read, say, 5 of these sentences, and then they're asked to contribute these sentences to the Common Voice data set by hitting submit. So that's how data gets in. Another side of Common Voice is actually the listen side of things. So it allows contributors to listen to other people's readings and validate these readings. So it works as follows. Basically, one's presented with a particular sentence that another contributor read, and then one could press play and hear the other contributor reading this particular sentence. And then you get to vote sort of up or down as if, is the sentence read correctly? And once one does this 5 times, one donates these 5 validations to Common Voice dataset by hitting submit. So our goal really in this is to basically create as many open data sets for speech as is possible in as many languages as possible. Really, this allows speech recognition not to be sort of the sole sort of proprietary reason of a few different languages, but also allows us to sort of open speech in as many languages as possible and as many communities as possible. And so, applying us a little sort of side. If you want to find out more about what we're doing, this is a Deep Speech project, which is the speech recognition engine side of things, and this Common Voice project, which is sort of the URL there for the Common Voice side of things.
Thank you very much. We now need the stage manager to change the presentation because Audace is also going to tell us a little bit. And in the meantime, maybe I can ask Lea, why did you choose Rwanda for the pilot of this project? Because as we've heard, it's a lot of languages, English also being problematic or challenging. And so why Rwanda?
Yeah, Rwanda is one of the front runners for digital transformation in Africa. It has a really ambitious digital strategy that is focusing on transforming into a knowledge-based economy by 2030. Additionally, we also have a project already in place in Rwanda that is supporting the Rwandan government in realizing and implementing their digital strategy, which means that we already have access to the government as well as to the digital ecosystem. And we basically started doing user research in Rwanda because we've been using a human-centered design approach, let's say, which basically focus on, well, first of all, understanding why would people donate voice data, so what motivates them. And then we actually set out together with Mozilla to host a hackathon to develop incentive mechanisms to collect open voice data. And Audace and his team won this hackathon.
Yeah, by show of hands, how many people have been in Rwanda in this room? Not so many people, because I actually understand it's 14 hours of flight from here. But if you have been, I can tell you what happens every last Saturday of the month. Every morning, the last Saturday of the month, same thing happens month after month, year after year. And what happens in Rwanda is umuganda. And you might wonder, what is umuganda? So basically, in ancient Rwanda, maybe 200 years ago, what used to happen was self-help and cooperation. So say if you have a neighbor that's sick and it's planting season, then you can do the planting for him. The community could gather and do the planting for him. And because you believe next year it might be you and you'll need the same help. And through that spirit, it's been updated. Like 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, now there were new needs and there were new infrastructure needs. Because say you are a farmer and you need the crops to get to the market. So now you need to build a road. And now the community got together and built a road. And the next month, your wife is pregnant and needs to give birth, so you need to build a hospital close to your neighborhood. And you'll need to build a school so that your kids can go to school in your neighborhood. So all this common infrastructure were built like this. And what is happening is every Saturday of the month, people get together in activities such as this. So you have everybody, 91% of the population, and also if you're a foreigner, you're also invited to the event. And in your community, you can build either a school or a road or something else that's needed. So, and this is nationwide. Everybody participates on a voluntary basis. And then at the end of the event, you can sit together and also tackle what needs to be done next month. And this is done mostly by the youth, because 60% of the population is the youth. So you have tremendous youth participation, and that's also what we tapped in the building Common Voice. And this allowed Kigali to be the cleanest city in Africa, and also one of the cleanest cities in the world. If you've been to Kigali, you'll know. So what we thought after the hackathon was what voluntary basis participation would allow such digital infrastructure and critical digital infrastructure to be built. And what was happening is we already had a platform for infrastructure to be built. So we just merged that with the digital age. And we've been having events such as this, where this is the Common Voice in Kinyarwanda section, where people just get together and every last Saturday of the month and do the voice recording or sentence collection for the Common Voice. And these events, mostly we do them at universities. So we can have a gathering at university or a co-working space. Basically, we try to find communities that would be interested in artificial intelligence or in digitizing the language. Yeah, so basically that's the whole concept of having a homegrown solution, a platform that's already existing, of building infrastructure and merging it to the digital edge. Yes. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. We are going to actually get to a Q&A. What I'm also interested in is what did you learn so far? So I hear that you ran into challenges and you solved them. So what did you learn?
Yeah, I think maybe the biggest challenge is finding sentences in public domain. You can find sentences in Kenya, Rwanda, but sentences with no copyright that's in public domain is very hard. So we would go to, let's say, a media company and they tell you, oh, no worries, we can give you the sentences. And then once you tell them, oh, you need to sign so that they can be the public domain, then they tell you, oh, we have to sleep on this and think about it. So actually our solution was, what we do is, at the events, we also have sentence collection. And also the results was that the sentences are better quality because you need to focus on what you're writing, and also it helps, and it's fun actually, if you think about it, it's fun just creating your own sentences, and that's how we tackle the main challenge of sentence collection.
That's so cool, and it gives us an idea of the bigger picture we're facing here, because it's not just startups, it's not just initiatives like Common Voice by Mozilla, but it's a challenge that we all face, that civil society faces, developers, startups, and also corporates together. And speaking of the corporates, we talked about David and Goliath yesterday, and Kelly very eloquently said, well, don't forget that David actually wins in the end. But the question remains, so with big tech corporates leading the way here and actually making progress and having other ways to collect voice data than relying on text that is available for free and as C0 licensed texts, how does it work? What are ways that you tackle these issues?
I mean, I guess in terms of a David versus Goliath competition, I say it isn't a competition of that sort in a lot of ways. I think what one has to remember in this regard is that these giant corporations, don't have a magic wand that's creating data sort of out of thin air in a lot of ways. I mean, what they do is they have products that collect data, and then data is coming from us, from the users, from the public in this room. And I think one thing we have to remember is that we're the Goliath in this regard. Sort of, we have the power in a lot of ways. I think once we decide what we're going to do with our data, where we're going to put it, how we're going to use it, I think so the roles become switched, and sort of David becomes Goliath, and Goliath becomes David in a lot of ways. So,
is that something that you would agree on, Audace, from your experience, that we own our data and the community is the one that, if they are sensitized, they're very willing to contribute to an open project, whereas they wouldn't be that easygoing with a commercial product?
Yeah, I think that's been our approach since the start, is we've been sensitizing that data is a common good. And a way we've been approaching to have voluntary-based participation is we approach communities that actually think in the future they'll need this data. So if we go to a university and they're developers or students studying languages or studying technology, and they think, oh, later I'm going to be the one building solution on top of this infrastructure, then they'd be willing to contribute in building the infrastructure. And we believe data is a common good and should remain that way.
I want to clap here. So also bringing that question back to Lea, so elephant in the room, why is GIZ not working with Facebook and Google on this?
Well, we are a federal German company, which means that we belong to the German state. And well, our work is based on human rights and civil liberties. In our work, we are basically aiming at making the world a better place. I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but that's actually what we're doing. Which means for the digital age that we, for example, would like to ensure that the internet remains a global public resource and that we help to democratize the potential, but as well as the development of technology, which means to make technology more inclusive and focus on technologies that is actually geared towards people and societies. So in this sense, the Open Voice Data Project is also a means to counter this digital neocolonialism and the exploitation of data subjects by big tech companies. We don't want this. We want to see power in the hands of people. And that's why Mozilla actually seems to be a much more natural partner for us.
Sorry, we're sharing a mic. I want to take this point up and come back to Audace on the ground. So which stakeholders are involved in your project? You mentioned the students and the university, but who are your most important players on the ground? Who are your partners? How does it work?
Yeah, so we have different partners. I'll start at the basis. So these are students that are actually contributing, and we consider them our biggest partners. But also the universities and the co-working space we have working at, and then we also actually have government institutions and the government of Rwanda, like the Regulation Authority or the Academy of Language and Culture, or other institutions like the Ministry of Justice actually, that come to the event because they're actually interested and say we can build solutions on top of this infrastructure for the common good. And also we can mention Mozilla and GIZ, I guess, also our biggest partners. And we believe that actually the community that's going to use this data set should be the one building it, and Mozilla and GIZ are helping also, and I think also the government is facilitating to scale the project so that we can have a complete voice data set.
Awesome. Kelly, Mozilla has a history of open source and community work. So what are learnings that you have from working with communities on technology? How do you support this community and also other communities worldwide in open voice data collection?
Okay, see, I guess learnings in terms of open source, I guess I learned it's hard. I think that's kind of one of the things you learn once you start doing this. I mean, so the naive picture of things is that you have some code, you put it on GitHub, you put the right license on it, and then you're kind of done in a lot of ways. I mean, that's really just the beginning. There's a lot of effort and a lot of sweat and tears go into actually supporting this. So there's issues you have to deal with, porting to different platforms you have to deal with, bugs you have to deal with, promotion you have to deal with, sort of dealing with sort of, let's say, press, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many things one has to deal with. And creating and sort of promoting an open source project, that sort of putting the code on GitHub is really just the very, very beginning of a lot of these things. And it's sort of from a naive point of view, you don't really see that. But once you're sort of in the trenches, you realize it's a long slog in a way. So in terms of supporting different communities, I think communities is a good word to use there. I'd say what we found, especially for lower resource languages, say for example Welsh, is that these languages tend to form language communities in a lot of ways that have a sort of shared goal of basically sort of keeping their language alive in this digital/English age. So there actually really is a community to talk to. So what we've done for these various different communities is we've had different events. So for example, we have an event when a language is sort of ready to start collecting data for Common Voice. So basically the website is translated and their sentences are collected for the particular language. We'll have, let's say, a kickoff event for that. Another thing we'll have is basically also continuing events where basically sort of continue the collection in a particular language. For example, I think we've had events for Kinyarwanda, for Welsh, for Hakachin, and for all these different types of languages. One thing we're also starting to do too in this regard is various different language communities are in the process or have also already applied to various different governments for funding to help continue this language collection effort. So we've helped, I guess, the Welsh community and also the Maori community basically apply for government funding to actually continue their language collection sort of progress. So.
We nerded out a little bit in the preparation of this session about language and communities and all of that, because it is so fascinating. So there's so much to dive deeply into, but staying with the topic of commons. Lea made the case of why GIZ is working with Mozilla and Digital Maganda. And I know of a few projects where GIZ is also working on supporting digital commons. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that as well.
Well, honestly, we don't have so many experiences supporting open source projects. I think one concrete project is Open HEMIS, which is an open health management information system that we are currently building together with a lot of partners. And I think that is a really important point when it comes to building commons. You need partnerships. You need to build an ecosystem around your common good. And in this sense, that is what we are doing with the Open HEMIS project that I just mentioned. And that's also what we are doing with Common Voice and Digital Maganda, so to help build a community around this shared cause, let's say.
The reason it seems so much to me is because we as GIG work with GIZ in a lot of different projects around communities, around community hubs. So call it tech hub, call it co-working space. It's always a place where the community gathers that actually builds products. And it's incredible to me to see that space grow so quickly, because only 5 years ago it was very small, and now already Audace is mentioning hubs and co-working spaces as stakeholders in his project, and that's really brilliant for me to see. And I don't know, I'm tempted to go to the point of how do we engage people in these projects more? How do we get everybody behind this project that is bigger than all of us and that is gonna really define the future of everybody? And I'm trying to keep it short, but to still give us a chance to explore a little bit more. What other learnings you've had? What other experiences you've had?
Yeah, I can maybe share a little bit what we learned in supporting tech hubs, because that is important for building a digital ecosystem around like commons as well. So there are two things I would say, and the first thing is funding. So funding obviously is really important, but you can also do a lot of harm with funding. So what we've learned is that it makes much more sense to actually support projects with core funding rather than with project-based funding. Because when you do project-based funding, you're basically keeping busy people with delivering value for you, but not developing their own project and the thing that they actually set out to do. So core funding, I think, is one of the things that we always should keep in mind in this regard. And in terms of funding, it also makes a lot of sense to really invest into infrastructures and not into individual efforts of people. So for example, when it comes to open voice data collection, it doesn't make, from our point of view at least, not so much sense to, fund people who are donating voice, but rather to build an infrastructure that helps as many people as possible to contribute their open voice data to the project. And the second learning that we've had as GIZ in this whole context, I think, is partnerships. GIZ is quite a huge organization, so we are working in 130 countries worldwide. We are usually working on a bilateral or multilateral level, which means that we have a lot of access to decision makers, actually. And we can help with our convening power to basically bring in new partners who can then share their resources in the project as well. And what we've also learned in Rwanda is that just by starting this conversation around AI and voice interaction, more and more people are actually coming to the events and say, well, we have an idea what to do actually with this. And to help set the agenda and to increase visibility for a certain topic, for like a commons topic, I think that is something where we, as an organization, can help very much.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Actually, it's my turn now, so. Vicky, you've been working in this field as well, and you have a lot to say about this as well. So you've been basically active for, like, I don't know, more than 10 years, I think, as an activist and researcher in, like, bottom-up innovation processes. What is your favorite example for, like, an open source or for a commons project, and why?
Thank you. Oh my God. First of all, to guide us from this to the next, for those that have been in the room, and I saw many people were sitting here from the previous sessions, so you've seen Tim from South Africa, you've seen Kutsai from Zimbabwe, and they're all part of this gig network. Like, we're gig together, and I want to stress a point that Audace made and Kelly made and also Lea made, that it's the people on the ground and all of us together should do no harm. And the best way to do that is to work together, but built on local experiences. And now getting back to the question of an example, there's a hub that I know of in Brazil called Instituto Procomum, and they base their whole program, everything they do, around data commons. So they do startup support, they do incubation, they do acceleration, but always based on commons. It's tricky, and the space in Brazil is shrinking exponentially at the moment, so it's getting harder. But it's a brilliant, beautiful project that you should check out. And in terms of how to use, like, best my favorite examples of open software, open hardware, it's very hard, but I think the most important ones are the basics that everybody knows. So let's say Wikipedia, basic free software example that we all use. And another example that's equally basic is Raspberry Pi, so that's open hardware. And now the beauty comes in what Audace also says, when people have ideas how to use that and combine it. And there's an offline server in a little box. It's tiny and it's very sturdy. It's called Hyrack Box. It's from Kenya, and you basically kind of download half the internet on it, or a lot, and you can take it elsewhere where there is no internet connectivity in the countryside, and then you have everything that you downloaded on your offline server available, and you can share that server with a lot of people around through one of the public Wi-Fis that Tim talked about earlier. And, like, I love when it all connects, when it all comes together, and those are my favorites, really.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I think this would actually make a wonderful bridge to talk about offline voice-based interaction. But let's not go down this road. I'd rather like to ask you, Kelly, what do you think about other means to collect data and to make data more accessible? So, for instance, the German Labour Party put forward the idea of a data for all bill. And then again, there are other actors in the space, such as the Deutsche Telekom, who are now developing data marketplaces. What do you think? Does it make sense? Is it an opportunity to also, like, democratize the basics for artificial intelligence? And where are its limits?
I guess for what the SPD is doing now, I guess maybe commenting on politics is a little above my pay grade, but I'll try. For what the SPD is doing, I think that the core idea is actually really interesting in a lot of ways. I mean, as far as I understand, it has sort of three principles. They want to, let's say, encourage people to make anonymized data sort of public for corporations and other organizations to do this. And they also want to facilitate this. So the second point they want to do is facilitate this through sort of like a data commons in a way that allows people to share this data sort of in a secure way. And the third thing, it probably is the most bold thing I think they want to do, is they want to introduce legislation which requires certain corporations, once they have a certain market share, to actually be forced to share parts of the data. So for example, in this context, it would mean, say, Google would have to be required to share some voice data that they have and train their systems on. I think the idea is bold. I think I sort of applaud it in a lot of ways. In terms of sort of slight issues that may have to think about, sort of details that we may have to think about in this regard, is sort of, in particular, anonymization. like anonymization is really hard to do right. It's a really hard thing to do right, and I think that's sort of underestimated in a lot of ways. So let's say as a concrete example, one may have, say, a video of people walking around in the street or something like this. And one may think, okay, I can make this public, I'll pixelate the faces and I'll cut the audio out of the video, and that's good enough in some sense of the word. However, there's sort of technologies, I think MIT developed this technology that allows one to look at videos and look at vibrations of things like mirrors and windows in the videos and reconstruct the audio from the video as a result of that. So there's various different things which make anonymization hard, and also maybe you can take two different data sets that are independently anonymized, and sort of through correlations in the data set, you can de-anonymize people in the two different data sets. So it's a hard thing to do. It's sort of a lot of thought has to be put into actually doing this, but in terms of the actual core idea, I think it's a really great idea in a lot of ways. But it's going to be hard to actually go from sort of the current sort of idea, the bill, into actually making it into a law. I think that's sort of a hard slog in a lot of ways. I guess in terms of Deutsche Telekom, their data commons. Also, I think the core idea is actually a good idea. One thing I worry about, and one thing I also worry about with Common Voice in this regard, is that I think what you don't want to do is have, let's say, one particular corporation kind of controlling this data commons in a way. One thing we're planning and trying to actually do with Common Voice is get a coalition of corporations, a coalition of different organizations to actually sort of, let's say, guide Common Voice. And that's how we'll know we kind of succeeded in a lot of ways with Common Voice, is when it can kind of like leave the house and get its own apartment with this coalition of partners. So.
Okay, thanks. So actually we're back to the ecosystems, I would say. So we've been talking about means to democratize data, but data is only one ingredient when it comes to artificial intelligence. Another ingredient is talent. So Vicky, from your experience also working with tech innovation hubs, how do we actually, enable more people to participate not only in using voice interaction, but also in building it?
I think we need strong communities, sensitized communities. Getting back to what Audace said, if you include people from the start and you get them as excited as you are about what's happening, what's possible, then people will join and kids will want to learn. Like, I know from my nephew that he doesn't like to learn as long as it's called learning. If it's called, hey, it's fun and you get to be able to do something really cool, then it's not considered learning. And I think that's equally true for me and for many of us. And luckily I don't have to write exams anymore. But if we all want to build these things together and understand the dimensions, and I mean it's mind-boggling if you think about it, like this coalition of corporations together with politicians just in one country, that's such a project to do. Then if you think on a European level, and let me just not get into Article 11/13, and then you think global, and then you think back from this global perspective into all the different local communities, it is such a massive task that we really have to get together. And so for the small part of how to educate people to actually be able to develop these technologies, to the discussions about governance that we have to have here, I think it all comes down again to this local communities strongly empowered, and I totally applaud this approach of core funding. So you have local empowered communities that talk openly and on eye level, as much as all of this is like old language and as cheesy as we want to make the world a better place, but we do. And so this is actually what's needed from my perspective, that we listen and we talk and we learn and we do it in an optimistic and positive way, because there's enough reason to think we're all doomed. So whatever we do, it's gonna make it better, I think.
Okay, so that's actually a great statement. So, in Rwanda we are already implementing something. We've touched on a couple of ideas for making more data available and for like how to actually bring more talent into the whole ecosystem. What is your plan, Audace, to scale up the project?
I think our plan is targeting more the communities around data, because we believe that data is not public, is not a private consumption good. So we believe that data is not the new oil, and that it's not for private consumption, that it's more of a common infrastructure. And if we have communities understand this, that the data is theirs and theirs for exploitation, not for private exploitation, then they consider donating the voice data to the common voice, and we build voice data sets, and we build common infrastructure, and in the end they will be the ones doing the solutions on top of that infrastructure, and this will allow innovation happening everywhere. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we are all in for ecosystems here, as you can see. But we would also like to know what's on your mind, actually. So we have now a couple of minutes, I think 10, 15 minutes, for your questions. Please raise your hand if you have any. Oh, yeah. There are some people in the room, I think, with microphones.
Hello, thank you. My name is Peter Eber here. I am writing digital human rights blog for Giordano Bruno Stiftung. And I was coming here with the expectation to meet a mindset that is somewhat has the doctrine of data being a public good, which means like all data or what? So there was a really crucial speech during last CCC conference, pointing out that health data, there are lots of applications that try to collect health data and make something useful of it, and it's a terrible failure because there is just no way to keep them private. So I would really like to know if you think this idea of public data ends somewhere or should be limited, or I mean, is it technically even possible to, for example, if China, for example, was collecting voice data from everyone, like they could have a voice fingerprint from everyone, and I just wouldn't trust them whatever they do with it. So, what is your mindset about this?
I take it. I guess I'm taking it. I agree with you. I think anonymization is a very hard problem to crack, and I think it's also, as I mentioned, I think anonymization and sort of keeping the data, let's say, people's health data sort of private is a really hard thing to do, because a lot of what one thinks of as private now, say for example, may release several different data sets, and correlations, as I mentioned, between these data sets may now not give you any kind of private information about people, but maybe there's some algorithm which is invented in 6 months or a year or something like this, where one can look at these different data sets and say, oh, well, this person has cancer and they had it on this and this day, they had diagnosed. I mean, these kind of things are, it's a very hard problem. It's really, I mean, I wish I had an answer. I really wish I do, but I don't. I think sort of acknowledging the difficulty of the problem is, I think, is a really good step, and acknowledging that it's a very delicate problem that one has to deal with when opening data sets is also, I think, a really good step. At the same time, I think it's hard to, maybe even impossible to find the solutions or now for all the different cases. I think one has to sort of, let's say, proceed very carefully with these data sets that one opens. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dave. I've got over here. I've got a short question about the Common Voice project. Is it allowed or desired to contribute, or that people contribute, speech with background noise, like train stations, conferences, bathroom, or kitchen, or something like that?
Okay, yeah, I can take that question too. Yes, it actually is a good thing, strangely enough. It's naively one may think like, oh, for training for speech data, you want sort of clean speech, you don't want any noise in the background. So the speech recognition engine is trained and realizes like, okay, this is speech, this is how speech sounds in sort of isolation. But actually not the case. Because most speech recognition engines sort of used in the wild in some sense of the word, are used in situations like that, where it's a train station, you're in a car, or what have you. So the speech recognition engine needs to be trained on data that it sees in the wild to actually learn how to deal with these sort of random background noises that may occur. So for example, like a car honking or a train going by or an S-Bahn going by, what have you. So actually having some background noise actually isn't a bad thing, it's actually a good thing, because then that data can be used to sort of create robust speech recognition engines.
Hello. Hi. I have a question. Did you finish?
Oh, yeah, I'm finished. Sorry.
I'm over here. My name is Solana. I work on the Internet Health Report of Mozilla also. I know that you've been looking to media organizations in many different languages as a potential source for CC0 text or audio that's already transcribed. I wonder if you've had any interest from media organizations in terms of using the technology once it would be finished. I feel like, I love the efforts to crowdsource voice, but they're quite small scale still in all the different languages, and I wonder if what would be needed for like a really, really big drive on a nationwide scale or on a regional scale for local dialects and that kind of thing would be a project that said, once we have these voices, we will do this. If there's been any kind of imagination, specifically from public media, but maybe also government, about what would be done with these voices that could help fuel the creation of a bigger commons.
A lot of questions, but I'll try to at least answer maybe some of them. For example, we've talked to the BBC. The BBC initially was actually interested in contributing lots of voice data, but then, let's say, our legal team and the BBC legal team got involved and realized that that was never going to work. However, at the same time, they're still interested in actually sort of reaping the benefits of a speech recognition engine in a lot of ways. Also, I guess sort of, let's say, related to that, in terms of Welsh, the BBC actually contributed data to the Wales National Library. Like lots of BBC programs are in Welsh and actually subtitled in Welsh. And it happens to be the way they actually contributed this, the Wales National Library can actually use this data to train on, which is sort of a loophole in the normal way of doing things. So what they were planning on doing in terms of applications, one of the things the Wales National Library wants to do with this data once it's used to train a speech recognition engine is essentially to basically provide text for a lot of different audio sources and video sources that the library holds, and then allow people to actually do searches over these texts. So then you can do searches over video and audio and things like this in Welsh. So that's sort of an example where a use case, let's say, where media can be used, or most media can be used from the BBC to actually sort of provide a service based around this media. But the BBC would have liked to be able to do this directly, but I think we had to find kind of like a roundabout way of actually doing this.
Yeah, and to also pick up from that, in Rwanda, a lot of text we're getting is from media companies, and because it's very complicated technically to get the speech and voice both entered, we just use the written transcripts of the articles and sections of them that are licensed under the CC0, and that allows us to have a lot of text that's in public domain that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering, how do you deal with volunteering in the frame of projects where there's a lot of people that is being paid for the work? And how do you create this value of we are not just taking free jobs because we need them, we don't have funding, or we decided to put the funding we have in other tasks? And how do you manage like dividing the activities or the parts of the projects that are going to be funded and the parts that are going to be volunteering based? And how do you create from a maybe like a design participatory perspective, like this feeling of belonging and being really like not replaceable in the sense of being a volunteering, like somebody that it's needed and not just somebody that cannot be affordable because it's an easy thing to do?
Yeah, so we are actually lucky because there was already a platform of voluntary participation in building infrastructure, but this regarded more in normal physical infrastructure, such as roads, and what we did was adapt it to the digital age. But also regarding that, what we also try to do is find the communities that would be interested in building solutions on top of that infrastructure, which means we looked at maybe co-working spaces that may have software developers or other people that are actually going to be the ones developing solutions, and they're mostly the ones who contribute and help us sensitize other people to contribute the voice. Another source would be universities, because students are really engaged in a lot of work and are really willing to do on a participatory level for the experience, and that's also one of the main sources of volunteers. And I think the other thing to also consider is that we also needed to get messages, key messages, that helped somebody feel like they own the project. So we targeted messages, say, digitizing Kinyarwanda, and somebody could feel a sense of pride or in the national language, and they could just contribute. Yeah.
Maybe I can elaborate a little bit more on the funding question. So far, we didn't invest much in this project because what we didn't say is that this is basically a project that was funded by a GIZ Internal Innovation Fund, which means that it's basically not money coming from the BMZ, like as an official commission, but we tried to identify new ways and new, approaches to, work with data, let's say. That was the overall aim of the whole thing. So what we've been doing with the little money we had for this innovation fund project was basically to invest it into structures. And I think the most expensive thing that we've actually invested in was the hackathon. So the first event to actually raise the topic of artificial intelligence and voice interaction in Kigali, and to bring different people together. So in terms of funding, as I said earlier, I think it's very much important to actually fund structures and not individual people. And what we are also trying to do is to engage the community a lot in these structure building activities, let's say. So for example, when we are doing an event, usually Audace and his team are doing the event. So we are there to consult on certain things. We help to bring in maybe new partners, but the vast amount of work is done by the community on the ground. And I think that makes very much sense because then you also have the right setup for sustainability, because at a certain point, that is moving on to other projects, let's say, and we would like to build a structure and a community that is vivid and strong. So we need actually these voluntary contributions in order to ensure that the project is going on even after we are not funding anymore. And so in this sense, we are investing in structures and also in bringing on new people and new partnerships. Because what we've actually found in Rwanda is that a lot of governmental agencies are interested in this topic, and that is already a great success, because then we can ensure that in a Rwandan context, that project is going to live on. With the support maybe from a governmental agency, that is the Information Society Agency in Rwanda, or the Academy of Language and Culture that Audace mentioned, and there's no tax money from Germany needed anymore. And I think that is in terms of funding, an approach that helps us to really build for sustainability.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Gilbert Munyemana. I'm from Rwanda, and I work for Plan International Rwanda, but part of my civic engagement, as Audace was saying, maybe in Maganda, I do technical advisory and educational technology. And I wanted to come back to 2 points that have been said on scale up. one of the big things that can make the project go up is the service which come after the data set. Like for example, I'll give an example, like to make educational content, it's easier to make it in English because like you can rely on text to speech because on English or French. But in Kinyarwanda, the recordings to make so expensive and it will be difficult to reach more than 80% of the population which does not speak any other international language. So I would say that the scale up, it's obvious as far as there is a complete data set and the use of the infrastructure. And on the voluntarism part, there is like a great need of different people who can do it to donate. Because like as being the society, most of the intellectuals like in Rwanda or elsewhere, they have started even the scholarships of the government and they feel like there is too much of giving back. So these platforms are one way of making use of those intellectuals. As Audace was saying, in Maganda, there is more on physical contribution. And on intellectual part, so there's a lot of people who will be willing to do that. So I just wanted to share that experience. And as far as we have the platform and the right services, the scale up even to neighboring countries is something which will come like afterwards, like kind of automatically.
Thank you very much. I really look forward to the same platform for Lugbara and Luganda and Uganda as well. So exciting times ahead. And I like the remark on if volunteering is something that belongs to everybody in the community, because there's a sense that it's not, you're not giving something to somebody else, but you're giving it to yourself as well, because you're giving it to everybody. That might be the spirit. In closing, and thank you all very much for your questions, I would like to ask one final question to the plenary, and let's start with Lea and go through. So what would you recommend to someone who would like to start an open voice data collection for their own language?
Yeah, I would start with user research. So to find out why people would actually contribute to an open voice data collection. That's basically what we did in Rwanda, and in doing so we were able to identify our target groups as well as potential user groups for this kind of data. And with the hackathon we then were able to develop actually like an incentive structure that motivates people to take part. So I think it's really important to understand why people do this and to then tap into this motivational pattern and to bring people on the project.
I have a simple answer. I just do it. I think that's probably my simple answer. I mean, I agree. You have to identify the community in a lot of ways, and that's key, especially for languages that are, say, less well data resourced. But I think just do it. I think one of the things we actually, when we're creating Common Voice, one of the things we actually tried to do is make it sort of a tool chest as opposed to sort of Mozilla controlling from on high. So if you want to actually localize a site to a particular language, whatever the language may be, you can do it on your own. We provide a website that actually can localize the site. Once it's localized, you can actually start collecting sentences, and once you collect these sentences, it'll make we'll be hosting it, but basically your site will be live and you can start collecting data in whatever language you actually want to target. So we aren't like a gateman. We're basically allowing you to do whatever. We're creating tools for you as opposed to limiting you in any way.
Yeah, I think if you want to do the same approach somewhere else, I think the first thing is to understand the local context. Because if you understand the local context, then you understand what incentivizes people to do this on a participatory level, on a voluntary basis. And after understanding the context, then build a community around the context. Because once you know why somebody would be willing to contribute their voice to Kinyarwanda, which in Rwanda is because they feel a sense of national pride or they're enthusiastic about building solutions on top of that infrastructure. So once you understand and you can identify a particular community that would be interested, then it would be very easy to build that common infrastructure. Yeah.
Fantastic last words, and the sign with the 0 minutes goes up. So I thank the panelists and I thank the audience. Enjoy Republica.
We